Today, Will and I are diving into one of the most essential, yet often overlooked elements of success, knowing your customer.
Not just guessing, not assuming, really knowing them. Because if you're not solving a real problem for a real person, no amount of funding or tech is going to get you out of the valley of death.
And we'll be talking about some practical tools founders can use, like the value proposition canvas, business model testing, customer discovery, and the elements of value. Let's start with the value proposition canvas. Is it actually a valuable exercise or just a nice visual? Do you know what it looks like? Yeah. So you have the gains and pains and customer jobs on the customer profile side, and you have the value proposition side with gain creators, product services, and pain relievers.
So in my work, especially in the early stage, with coaching and various stakeholders, we went through the business model canvas. And I have to say, I've never really truly understood the application of the object. I understand the kind of discovery of early consideration of these essential points, but how do you take it as a kind of ongoing tool that your business can use? I'm always a little bit uncertain about that. What's your opinion, Kata?
I think that these things only work if you have clear assumptions about what value you deliver to your customers and clear assumptions what value your customers need or find in your product and what are their needs. And it's not enough to have those assumptions, right? You have to test them.
Exactly. So how do you go about creating assumptions and then testing those?
The value proposition canvas is one of the tools that helps you to identify your assumptions and come up with tests. The value proposition canvas has these two parts, the business side and the customer side. And the goal of the value proposition canvas is to help you to design your value proposition in a way that matches your customers' needs. And you need to figure out what your customers need to do in order to use your product, find your product and use your product. And you need to help from the business side, not just to solve their problems, but you also need to help them use your tool in the simplest possible way.
Yeah, bearing in mind that Walk the Valley is very much focused on the life science industry, is this tool widely used in early stage medical device life science product development?
So I think there's a missed opportunity here in the life sciences, because often life science MedTech tools originate from research outcomes, from inventions in an academic setting, and then building a business around it often skips this task of actually asking the customers, identifying who are the customers and the users, and asking them, what is it that you actually need? So the products often are built on assumptions of medical practitioners or academics. And therefore the product tends to fail when it needs to connect to the clinical practice or to the patients that it's supposed to help. And therefore I think this is a great tool to start with when you have an invention coming from an academic setting, to just take some time and play around with your assumptions.
But the benefit of having assumptions is that you are able to then go out and work tirelessly to prove them right or wrong. And the benefit of proving them wrong is that it allows you to accelerate towards the right answers much quicker. It's part of that process and that necessity to put something on paper and say, this is what I believe to be correct, and to get as quickly past that point of yes, it's correct, or no, it isn't, and what is the right answer. And I think it's also a common startup failure where you don't take courageous decisions on your assumptions and you get stuck. And you really need to put things on paper and be brave enough to accept that they will be right or wrong. And when they are wrong, you need to accelerate past them. And there's a lot of work that needs to be done on that in the early stage. And indecision is the biggest killer in this phase.
Yeah, exactly. And what else can help you here with testing the assumptions? The business model testing table. Have you ever used it?
No, tell me about that.
The business model testing table has 4 key elements: the feasibility, the desirability, viability, and adaptability. You put these into a spreadsheet and write down to each category your assumptions. Is your product feasible? Is your product desirable? Is it viable? And can it adapt to the current conditions? And you can come up with ideas how to test this. Now, with feasibility in the healthcare setting, you need to be in a very advanced technology readiness level stages to be able to do a proper feasibility testing. But you can do, in the beginning, you can do a hypothetical feasibility testing as well. So you can come up with different tests. And these are, now I'm talking to our academic listeners, this is very much like a qualitative study. You don't have to have representative answers, statistically representative answers to any of these questions. This is business. Here, you're not doing an actual research study. You're doing assumptions, coming up based on your assumptions and what you find through these qualitative interviews and thought experiments and desk research. You're identifying your milestones. Where do you need to progress next with your invention so that it can become an innovation? You can also identify the success criteria, as these are your milestones, right? And the application implications and next steps. So this is the business model testing table. It's more like a thought experiment mixed with some qualitative research.
Yeah, but if I'm not jumping ahead too far here, the very best feedback that you can get in validation is feedback from the market, correct? And actual response from potential customers on the product that you're developing.
Oh my God, well, you're so right. Yes, definitely. The market gives you the best feedback, but you need to be open to hearing the market. And therefore you need to talk to the people who will end up using your product, and be open to also reshaping it a little bit to make sure it fits, it can adapt to the conditions of the market.
One thing that when we first started our company, our coach encouraged us to do, even before we had a prototype or an MVP, was to actually start to cold call potential customers and to ask them, did they have the problem that we assumed they did? And how big was that problem? And what would they pay to solve that problem? And, you know, how strong was the desire to engage in a company like ours, to go into a pilot or to actually start to address that problem? It was a really good exercise because, you know, you need to learn to hear a lot of no's in that, but to kind of flesh out the positive responses and to have people validate that you have correctly identified a problem is super important.
I would go further. I would also ask them what sort of pain points they have in using the current tools to solve their problems.
Yeah.
And if you can identify those and connect your product to that, then you already have a better product than the current one in the market.
Yeah, and this is also like a very common failure point in the life science industry, is that where there is an established methodology or an established product or procedure for something, bringing in a somewhat innovative or revolutionary method to that needs organizational change to enact that and for that product to be adopted. And you need to know the willingness. How hot does that fire burn in the hands of the healthcare practitioners? Because if it's too deep rooted and well established, then no matter how good your product is, that change is very hard to enact.
Remember when we were talking with Kush Pugnani, the founder of Spermasense, in the beginning of our podcast journey? he pointed this out, that creating a disruptive product for the healthcare is not a good strategy, because nobody's going to be able to adopt it, because then you have to disrupt the whole healthcare system, which is a very big, monstrous organization.
Yeah.
But if you can improve it with incremental changes, if you can create a product that solves problems but with the current tools, or can seamlessly integrate into the clinical workflows, then you're much more likely to be adopted in the healthcare system.
Yeah, agreed.
There's a great framework from Harvard Business Review, the Elements of Value Pyramid. It's a concept that was developed by Eric Almquist, John Senior, and Niklas Bloch. The authors of this concept were looking into the elements of the values that customers really want. It follows the shape of the Maslow pyramid. It breaks down what customers value from functional all the way up to emotional and social elements.
So you need to kind of start with the functional, correct?
Yeah, we can connect this to healthcare, is that in HealthTech, people often focus a lot on features. And as we said in the beginning, it is often overlooked, what value do you deliver actually to your customers? Do you connect to what they want? And the value can also mean peace of mind, or reduced anxiety, or feeling in control.
Does this pyramid help you kind of identify, are you solving a real problem, and is it urgent and painful?
Yes. Also, it is helpful to think about how you communicate your value proposition depending on who you're selling your product to procurement managers or clinicians or the patients.
And really separating the value of your product in emotional terms, functional terms, and in the best case scenario, covering both angles there.
Exactly. And you can also think about whether it's life-changing or how disruptive your product is, and whether it has a long-term impact or a social impact. Just like the Maslow pyramid, it also starts with a functional layer, and then goes to an emotional layer, belongingness and love needs, intimacy and friendships, and then you move on into the next emotional level or psychological needs level, which is feeling accomplished, and then you move on to self-fulfillment needs.
A little bit tying back to what Kush said as well. I mean, the market doesn't reward extreme cleverness; it rewards extreme usefulness.
Exactly.
And you need to balance the degree of innovation, because to a certain point, innovation is by its nature extremely disruptive. And if you want adoption, if you're building for adoption, then you need to aim for usefulness. And usefulness ties in with only a certain degree of disruption.
Yeah. To wrap all this up, I've learned a 10-point value proposition checklist at Lund University. It's a quick run-through of 10 questions to assess your value proposition. And we're going to try to apply it to life science entrepreneurship. The first one, is your value embedded in a great business model?
This is really an important question to understand. Do you have a good offer that's inside of a broken model? Because it won't survive. You need to dig a little bit deeper into this.
Are you targeting the most important jobs, extreme pains, and essential gains?
And this really comes down to that degree of necessity of your product. I mean, like, how hot does the fire burn in the healthcare setting? Are you genuinely solving a headache?
Are you tackling unsatisfied jobs, unresolved pains, or unrealized gains?
It can be that the existing solution works perfectly, or there are other products already on the market that have the problem solved, and then you're just noise in the market.
Are you focused on a few pain relievers and gain creators and doing them extremely well?
Excellence is the target here. Not trying to cover too many problems and solve too many problems. Choosing the correct pain relievers and the gain creators and doing them really well is the right strategy.
Exactly. Less is more. A product that is clinically strong, easy to integrate, and addresses one high value use case is far more valuable than a generalist tool.
Mm-hmm.
Are you addressing functional, emotional, and social jobs together?
Covering both of those angles or all of those angles means that you have a holistic proposition, and that's going to be an easy decision for budget owners, and it's going to be a great result for the product users as well.
For example, the clinicians can feel more confident in using your product, or more confident in their role because your product helps them to be more confident.
Yeah, just because it's a life science product or a medical device, it doesn't mean that it can't impact the sensation of the user in the application of the device. If things work well, the positive feedback is beneficial to you as a company.
Does your value align with how customers measure success?
Yeah. This is such a standout startup issue here, is really what you perceive to be the success of your product user is quite often completely detached from what they perceive to be success.
So it's very, very important that these metrics are your customers, not yours.
Exactly.
That you need to keep in mind. Are you serving a big audience or a niche that pays a premium?
Well, you need to have a balance of scale and scarcity for this to benefit you. So attacking the biggest part of the market or identifying a niche that will pay more, you need to know what is the right strategy.
Okay, next. Are you meaningfully different from competitors?
Yeah, this comes back to a point that we were making earlier, is that it's not differentiation or innovation for the sake of innovation. You want differentiation and to provide value through that. So that is kind of a little bit related to the previous point about finding a niche as well. It's good to be different, but it's good to be different and better.
In a meaningful way. Are you clinically validated? Are you faster to integrate? Are you less expensive to train on? These are very important differentiators. It's not just a shinier, nicer interface that you need to focus on. Do you substantially outperform on at least one dimension?
Yeah. And this also comes back to the point about not trying to bite off more than you can chew, right? You want to choose one area and one value point where you stand out, not trying to cover too many bases, just one dimension where you are decisively better than all other potential solutions.
And you also need to be able to back your value proposition with hard numbers. Is your device reducing operating times by 30% or detect a condition 2 days earlier than the current methods?
Exactly.
This is very important to put into your value proposition, and it needs to be backed by evidence. You can also use user testimonials if you have them. Okay, and now the last one, number 10. Is your value hard to copy?
This is the biggest challenge in gaining investors and gaining capital, is that do you have good solid intellectual property? Is the product going to be easily repeated or easily copied? And are you going to end up in a very saturated market, or are you going to be that kind of standalone, outstanding first choice product in a market?
You can also create barriers to the market that make your solutions hard to replicate. It's just the real trick can be the execution speed, the integration into clinical workflows. You need to have very good relationships with your customers, and that is difficult to copy.
Very interesting points and really good questions to ask yourself as you start to bring your company to life and your product to market.
And a little disclaimer in the end. Even if you tick all these boxes, we can't guarantee that you will succeed.
Good to have a disclaimer, right?
But we're hoping to identify the best and most useful tools for healthcare entrepreneurship in order to lower the number of healthcare startups that fail.
Exactly, yeah. Knowing why companies fail and looking at that, that kind of aspect of the industry where we see huge amounts of investment go into products and companies without the success rate is just as important as highlighting the ones that succeed. Because actually success is much more of a singularity than failure is a commonality. It's just that the analysis of a success is really much less valuable than the analysis of a failure, because the learnings is so much richer in that. So it's very common these days to talk and to highlight failures and disasters, and I think that's good here. We need to look at what is overlooked and why we don't bring more of these products into a successful implementation.
That's a great last sentence to complete today's episode.
It's been a pleasure rambling with you, Kata.
And it's always a pleasure to ramble with you, Will.
Until next time.
Keep walking the valley. If you found this episode insightful, don't forget to subscribe and leave a review. It helps us bring more real-world lessons to innovators like you. And remember, you can now listen to Walk the Valley on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. Thanks for tuning in, and until next time, keep walking the valley.